All right, everybody, welcome to the For the Love of Language podcast. I'm EJ.
I'm Stacy, and this is a very special episode for one reason and one reason only.
This is our 70th episode, which is a cool number.
70 is great. 70, what a classy gal, that 70.
It's fantastic. And we are going to celebrate by talking about
Intervocalic voicing! Phonology, phonetics.
Yeah, so this is a fun topic because I have actually seen people ask questions about why English words with this specific phonological phenomenon sound the way they do and not the way they're spelled.
Yes. And I have been coming across this more and more because, fun fact to all of our listeners out there, I'm teaching full-time again. I've been teaching, but now it is a full-time thing, and let me tell you how many times I have to explain this concept day in and day out. But it's fun and it's really interesting because it does interact with like the way things are spelled with the orthography of it all. So it's a nice little shift in our brains of like, okay, what is orthography and what is phonology and how do they kind of mismatch and match up in different ways and yada yada yada.
Okay, I think we should break this down into its pieces, but first let's just give a few examples of intervocalic voicing so people know what we're talking about before we break it apart. So, a few examples might be the word butter. Mm-hmm. It's spelled with two T's in the middle of the word, but when you say it, it's a D.
Yes.
Butter.
Yes.
Same thing with the word season. Right? There's an S when you spell it, but you say it with a Z.
Yes.
Season. So those are both examples of consonants that would otherwise be unvoiced between two vowels becoming voiced. So let's explain what voicing is before we go any farther.
Okay, this might get a little ASMR-y.
You're so right.
This might get a little ASMR-y, so this will be fun. We'll make it a little fun for you guys. Okay. So all of our listeners at home, I want you to put your hand to your throat. Usually like the base of your throat is a good one because your voicing happens usually, it's in the middle of all of it, but like just the front of your throat is fine. And I want you to make the t sound. So say ta, 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 ta. And now say da, 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 da. And try to remove the vowel and just say t, 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 t. And notice how that your voice doesn't move at all. Like the vibrations stop when you make the t sound. And the idea with intervocalic voicing is our mouths are lazy. We're trying to communicate as much as we can while doing as little work as possible. And that's just human nature. And it's just kind of how the voice works. So when you have two voiced things that are next to each other and they are split by an unvoiced thing, it seems counterintuitive to pause your voicing to hit a non-voiced thing and then start your voicing again.
Awesome.
It happens, of course, especially when there is like contrast that you need. But for a lot of situations, your voicing kind of just wants to continue. And so this is where you get, okay, vowels are inherently voiced. And so if a consonant is between two vowels, it will most likely show up as a voiced version of that consonant. So the T's in butter will sound like D's because they're between two vowels or vowel-like things.
That was a really good holistic explanation. I want to give a slightly different example and explanation as well, just that might hit differently for different people.
Absolutely.
So you used two stops to illustrate voicing with t and duh. Mm-hmm. I actually think it's easier to see with a fricative. So
you're not wrong.
With a sound that is continuous. So if you do the same thing where you hold your hand to your neck with an S sound, you won't feel that vibration versus if you do it with a Z, then you can feel that vibration.
Yes.
And so it's the exact same thing.
It's the exact same thing.
It's just that when the sound is held, for me, it's a lot easier to actually feel the difference.
This is true. And it's also easier to notice the difference because with a stop, the air inherently has to stop. The sound stops eventually. But with fricatives, they can go for as long as you have air in your body.
Exactly. So that's just another way to try if you were having trouble feeling the voicing, try it with a fricative. And really, the examples that we're giving in both cases, you'll notice that your mouth is in the exact same position. Like with a t and a d, your tongue, your mouth is in the exact same position. The only difference between those two letters phonetically is that voicing. It is that vibration that you can feel in your neck. The same thing with S and Z. Those two sounds are phonetically the same, except for the voicing. So I just want to call that out. And then another thing that Stacey just kind of said that is like totally true, but like you might not have inherently known if you haven't studied phonetics, is that vowels are all voiced.
Vowels are all voiced 100% of the time. Isn't that kind of fun? I mean, there are some languages out there that have voiceless vowels. And they're weird and they're super uncommon, and like the words that they're in are not very like used very often, but there is such a thing as a voiceless vowel. But in that situation, it's mostly just air that comes out of your face that is in the shape of what your vowel would be had it been voiced. And I cannot give you any clear-cut examples right now. And also, you wouldn't be able to hear it. Voiceless vowels are kind of a visual thing. And they run on vibes.
Well, that's like a stop. You only hear the stop because of, like,
the contrast of everything around it. The contrast
of what's around it. Yeah. Otherwise, it's like your mouth is just in this position, but you gotta release it to actually hear it. So there's some really interesting things there. But yes, in, like, English and from everything I've heard, vowels are voiced.
Vowels are voiced.
You can kind of accept that one.
Yes.
So that raises a question then. If all vowels are voiced, why isn't every consonant in the middle of a word voiced?
Ooh, I have this one. I know. Pick me, EJ.
Oh my gosh, Stacey, go ahead.
I know the answer to this one. It's all about contrast. Important contrast. So when we are creating words for things, we want them to be dissimilar enough that they can be identified in different contexts or, understood in certain situations. Of course, there's things like homophones and homonyms, which make our brains hurt and make my students want to cry. But... Oh, they hate homonyms so much. We were talking about watch and how you can have watch like the item that you wear on your wrist that tells time, but then you also have watch the verb where you watch TV, and they were like, I don't like that one. And I'm like, that's why you gotta understand syntactic structure so you can identify the noun versus the verb. Anyway, and also context.
And semantics.
Anyway, but the idea is that if the consonant that is between two vowels is significant in displaying some sort of meaningful contrast, then it's not gonna get voiced. It won't undergo that process because the integrity of that consonant needs to stay the same for whatever reason, or it might undergo a different change to adapt, but still like maintain that vibe.
Yeah, or you could have cases where you have this morphological root that you want to keep and has that meaning with that sound. So one that Stacey just used a few sentences back was the word dissimilar.
Yes.
And so that it doesn't turn into dissimilar, right? Because what you actually have is the word similar. And so that needs to sound like similars even when you put the dis prefix in front of it. Technically now you have is on the sound I on both sides of the S, but it stays an S instead of a Z because the word that you're trying to highlight, the root, is similar. And so we're not changing that. So that's actually a really good example of not having intervocalic voicing.
Yes. Yep. So if there's ever some sort of contrast that you feel like you need to make, you will kind of just automatically default to whatever the original voicing of the consonant was, if it matters. Other situations, but it's a pretty common process. So it happens a lot.
But not always.
Yes, but not always.
So yeah, like just hearing us talking, like the word default that Stacey used, it wasn't devault, it was default.
Yes.
So you have a lot of cases where this doesn't happen, but there's a lot of instances where it does, and there's also different languages are at different stages of historical change with this. So sometimes over time words will adapt and take on this specific change.
Yeah.
And it might just have not happened yet. Maybe it won't happen. And there's several reasons why it might not, based on the stress, the morphology, different things like that.
I was going to point out the examples that you called out for me using both have prefixes. And prefixes are notorious for blocking and doing all sorts of things in morphological structure. And one of those is they will block this natural process because having that morphological contrast, that distinction in meaning between the prefix and the root word, that's far more important than maintaining our phonological laziness.
Right? But just naturally, it happens a lot where if you have two voiced vowels, which all vowels are voiced, and then a single, generally when it's just a single consonant sound between them, when you have groups of consonants, it doesn't happen so much.
It can happen. There are some languages that have more complex vowel clusters that will undergo this process, but those usually happen in, like, at the beginnings of words. I'm thinking of, like, specifically some African languages that have, like, mba, like, they have, like, a nasal plus some sort of stop. But you will rarely see this with fricatives. Fricatives, if they're in a consonant cluster, are unlikely to change their place or their manner. So one example would be, like, school. Even if like the SK sound, that would be less likely to be that would be less likely to change. First of all, because it's at the beginning. That was a bad example. Never mind. But the understanding is that, like, vowel clusters are less likely to change, but if they are similar enough and one of them is not a fricative, they might change.
Consonant clusters,
consonant
not
clusters.
Vowel clusters.
Thank you. Sorry. I'm doing great today.
No, you really are. It's fantastic. We're not perfect, and that's fine.
But this is why I have a podcasting partner to catch me on all of this stuff that I mess up.
Very rarely. Very, very rarely. But that is intervocalic voicing. Is there anything else that you want to add to it? I feel like we gave a lot of examples of when it does and does not happen.
Yeah, I think one thing I want to emphasize, something that I have to emphasize to my students, is that, like, every language does this. Because far too often, and I'm sure our listeners are listeners because they have an understanding about this, but I feel like it's always important to note that, like, these certain phonological phenomenon, I mean, specific language phenomenon in general, might be considered difficult or weird or abnormal because you're noticing it in another language, but that does not mean it's exclusive to that language.
That's a really good call out.
Yeah. A lot of my students think that English is inherently more difficult than other languages, but that's just because of their language background that they're coming from. And I make sure to, like, call that out a lot of, like, depending on your language background, when you learn about these things, you might think it's weird or abnormal or unusual. And I have to remind people this happens everywhere.
Well, and we have an entire podcast episode on what is the hardest language that dives into some of that.
You should listen.
You should. But in general, like, there are a lot of phonological, morphological, other rules like this that apply just across the board because of how sound and how the actual anatomy of your mouth works.
Yeah, I don't know if everybody knows this, but, like, all humans are kind of built the same.
What? That's crazy.
Like, we have some, like, you know, visual differences, but, like, our sound systems function the exact same way. None of us have, like, freaky ass tongues that are doing things they shouldn't. Like, our throat systems are pretty much universal between all humans. That's why we're able to do, like, where we consider ourselves a species.
And the main reason why some people have a greater difficulty making some sounds is just because they didn't grow up with that sound.
You don't have certain contrasts, you didn't practice it, you know, you like. But any sound that a human can make, that a human has made, is possible for another human to make. So there is a wide variety of sounds that humans can make, and there's also a limitation based on our own physical anatomy. However, we all are following some of the same phonological principles because we all have roughly the same anatomy and are limited the same.
Right. So we should probably spend some other episodes talking about other phonological and morphological rules that apply across languages, because that could be interesting.
100%. I am super duper down. There's a bunch of really fun ones. We could talk about vowel harmony.
Ooh, we'll have to leave that cliffhanger.
Well, we'll leave you hanging. We'll talk about vowel harmony at one point. That's one that English doesn't have, but other languages do. And in other languages, it's really easy, but English finds it very hard. So, complexity in its various forms.
Cool. Well, anything else you want to add on intervocalic voicing?
You're going to notice it everywhere now. Have fun.
I hope you do.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you for listening to For the Love of Language. Follow us on Instagram, and we'd love to hear from you.
Bye.